You a bit cold over there, Roger.
It's freezing in Dublin. Hello.
It's cold down here, but I imagine it's probably colder up in Dublin, but we had frost, I know, today. It almost looks like snow. We're trying to pretend like it's snow because it does look nice.
Oh, we've had some real snow here.
Have you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Real live snow.
I think my banner's already giving up the ghosts. That's not a good start.
Seems to be. Yeah.
The tech's not ready for this conversation. Who knows if we are either. Back to another episode of Debates with Hess and Yates. This is number 6, I think, if my counting's correct. So halfway to a dozen avocados, I guess.
You're just showing off now, knowing that 6 is halfway to a dozen.
Got to keep our math skills fresh while we're in lockdown, don't we?
Absolutely.
Those who have joined us in the past, you know the drill. Say hello in the chat. Hello, Ronnie, Amber, good to see you. Terry, Tom, Deb. Yeah, I know. Nice to see Ronnie in the chat nice and early. I think he's keen for this discussion too. I know this is a passionate subject for a lot of us.
Oh yeah, Jeremy. You know, like we often issue a trigger warning or a content warning. I think we ought to issue a poll warning.
That is true. There might be polls.
Yeah,
we can get the temperature of the room. We're going to see if they can work with StreamYard or not. We've got Nikki and Sam joining us here as well. So as we're kind of firing things up, if you can help us to combat those nasty anti-vegan algorithms on YouTube, Facebook, and the rest of it, just by giving this a quick like and possibly messaging it to a friend who you think is interested in answering the question, can conservatives be vegan? And even if people already have strong views on the subject, we're not necessarily here to, I think it's less so about answering the question, but the process of getting to an answer that's important today, because we'll be looking at the definitions of veganism, conservatism, and the rest and see how much they mesh, as well as just kind of the practical applications. You know, how do we approach conservatives at all? You know, how do we approach them, if at all? So,
we could just answer the question straight away and just say no.
I knew you were going to try to make this a 3-minute live stream. So yeah, I mean, the topic for today, I think this was spurred on by a number of things. Obviously, the developments recently in, my country of origin in the U.S., kind of swirled. We actually picked the topic, I think, a day before all that kicked off. So it's obviously a very relevant topic. And the other reason it's a relevant topic is because of news recently here in the UK. But before we get started, looks like there's about 24 at the moment across all the platforms. So that's a pretty good number to get us started. So if you would be so kind, if you could just test out our new polling system, we're going to see if this thing works at all. So if anyone, hello, Michael and Jennifer, if you can just see if this works. And Anne, this is theoretically a link to the Google Forms, and it's just a simple, basically yes, no, or I'm not sure, and that'll help us get a feel for the, what people are thinking. And then it looks like we're already getting results coming in, so that's great. So that's not you, voting, is it, Roger?
Not yet.
You're not allowed to vote.
Oh no! Oh right.
Okay, so
people have got to cut and paste that, aren't they? Right.
Well, I think YouTube or Facebook should turn it into a link. The trick is hopefully they come back to the chat after they're done if they're on their phone. But otherwise, I think it's actually working better. We were going to do a manual system, but the good thing is this is an anonymous vote. So this is actually really interesting to see these coming in. We put this together, about 5 minutes before we started. So I'm glad we took the plunge and did that. We'll leave that for another kind of 20 seconds or so. Because I'm still seeing the numbers go up. But this brings me back to
It wasn't me. It's completely.
This brings me back to our old Zoom days. If anybody's been with us since the Zoom days of the Animal Rights Show, you know that the polls were a popular feature. At least with me. I'm not sure if anybody else, but yeah. So this is interesting. I think I'll pull up the results here, and feel free to keep voting. So there we have it. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. So out of the about 30 people watching, about half have voted. And I mean, we're still seeing some come in. So it actually looks like a lot of people are kind of open-minded on the subject. So it seems to be a good conversation to be having. It does seem like of those who are decided that, seem to be leaning towards the no side of things. So, yeah, I mean, I think the number's stopping right there. But what do you think, Roger? Is this about what you would have expected?
No.
You're hoping to have a landslide victory before you even have to say anything, weren't you?
No, I guess that's about right. Hey, Brad, how you doing?
Yeah, hello, strangers indeed, and hello, Guyun. Yeah, so talk. Yeah, good to see some familiar names and some new ones.
Yeah, that's what you'd expect. I think a lot of the I'm not sure are waiting for the conversation. I think, which is
that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Yeah, because it does seem to be quite a loud voice saying that it's not possible. But maybe we'll see after today, and it is actually reflected in the poll results. But there's a lot of people who are kind of open on it too. So I think Roger's going to take the position that conservatives cannot be vegan, whereas I'm going to argue that they can be. So we're going to see how that goes. I guess as long as the numbers are shifting in the right direction, we could argue that's a victory there. So even if there's still a majority no, if depending on how the numbers shift, if you know what I mean, if we're going to treat this as a formal debate typey thing. But with that, should we just get into the latest news? Because I think the big news that kind of got us both thinking about this was the launch of the Vegan Conservatives group here in the UK, which it sounds like it's a combination of 10 MPs doing Veganuary, as well as the website being set up, which we can get into maybe a little bit. I know Roger has some prepared remarks, but I don't know. When you first saw this launch, do you have any initial thoughts, Roger? Or you prefer to get into your opening statement that you think is going to address some of it?
No. I think what happened was I think a few of the non-vegetarians or whatever, or vegan friendly, plant-based friendly MPs were probably approached by Veganuary. And then I think that they probably all kind of got to know that they were all involved, and then they thought, well, why don't we launch a group as well? Because they call themselves a caucus, and we did a bit of research because the word caucus has got a long and complicated history, especially the States and Britain use it differently. But the modern use of caucus in British politics just means kind of subsection or pressure group. So obviously they see themselves as a lobby group within the Conservative Party. And so I think that's why they thought, well, if we're going to do Veganuary, we might as well launch the website as well. So they've launched a website which has got some interesting, if contradictory, kind of ideas, it seems to be in there, which is quite interesting. I mean, it's very kind of interesting from the movement point of view, their website.
Yeah, and just a few of the comments that are coming in, Fear of a Vegan Planet, and just a bit of a caveat. Once we get into the discussion itself, we may be a bit less tuned into the comments as we normally are, because we normally do try to prioritize them, but we will bring in as many comments as we can. It's just if Roger and I are trading points, it's going to be hard we might have to play a bit of catch up once we catch up on those conversations. But basically the point that gay rights has, that there's a push from conservatives for that, from a progressive perspective, and Svenja said that they voted yes just to challenge Roger. So there you go. And also, I think there's going to be a lot of important framing, I think, that happens today, because framing is crucial for how we approach these issues. But Guyman's just kind of pointing out that while there is a big philosophy behind this, kind of that focus on other animals, so that's part of it.
Oh yeah,
and I think in the spirit,
that's not in any doubt either, is it? So,
well, and I think to Michael's point, should we get this party started? Let the battle commence, as Michael says.
Oh, look out! He's got all the bells and whistles out now, folks.
You and your puns. Oh, Yeah, so I think you had some opening remarks that you kind of wanted to share to help frame the conversation, and I can take notes throughout. And then we've got what people can hope to expect from the next. Normally, we shoot for an hour. I think we will be a bit more flexible. I know Grumpy Vegan Granddad does have I believe, a debate happening at 6, so we'll understand if you jump off to join that at, in a wee bit here. But we'll probably be a bit flexible on that hour mark because I can see this conversation is going to be a difficult one to pack in and do it justice in a shorter time than that. So if you want to start with any opening remarks, and then I can do a bit of a response, and then we'll get into the detail. And then there's also an article I saw that kind of runs through the political parties and kind of how they stand on different issues that I think will give a bit of a, third point of communication. I could tell. I was going to say you're chomping at the bit, but maybe you're chomping at the carrot, should we say, to put in the hummus.
I'm just waiting for you to draw breath. That's all, Jeremy.
That's the media trick, isn't it? Just breathe, breathe in between.
Yes, that's what. Yeah, Thatcher learned how to do that. Breathe in the middle of a sentence. That's right. Yeah. So that's a different thing. We're not doing media sociology. So you want me to go for my opening statement, do you, Jeremy?
Yeah, and for those comments that are coming through, we may not necessarily respond to them all directly, but I'll put them up on the screen just because we're on different platforms, 3 different platforms, just to make sure everybody's seeing all the comments. Yeah.
Okay.
Fire away.
I shall refer to my notes. It says, "Notes for conservative debate with Jeremy." Okay. Right. So
we just lost 3 viewers.
So I've said many times that social movements are claims makers in society or civil society. Social movements often identify what they characterize as social problems, and then they make claims about them. And obviously, there are some counter movements which struggle against what the social movements want, etc. Those claims are driven by the collective values of the people in the movement. Veganism as a social movement is about justice and anti-oppression. It's opposed to the exploitation and oppression of sentient life, as Donald Watson wrote in 1945. So I think today's debate gets us into the territory of vegan values, because at heart it's about who we are, what values are important to us, and what values we align with. I was going to say glibly that I could probably win this debate this week by uttering 2 words, Donald Trump. But I won't do that, and we'll probably get back to grab a pussy later, but not for now. Today's session also is not about party politics as such. It's more about politics and political spectrums, that kind of idea. So Tony Judt, the author of Ill Fares the Land, it's a 2010 book, writes this: "Something is profoundly wrong with the way we live today. For 30 years, we have made a virtue out of the pursuit of material self-interest. Indeed, this very pursuit now constitutes whatever remains of our sense of collective purpose. We know what things cost, but we have no idea about what they're worth. We no longer ask if a judicial ruling or legislative act, is it good? We don't ask that. Or is it fair? Is it just? Is it right? Will it help bring about a better society or a better world?" So I'm going to follow, in general terms, a model that George Monbiot set out in a recent talk. And he talked about neoliberalism, consumerism or consumption, and capitalism. If we go to neoliberalism, it's an idea that originated around about the 1930s, but its major development was in the 1970s and associated with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Then, sadly for some people, tragically for other people, it continued within New Labour in Britain and within the Clinton administration in the States. What neoliberalism says about humans is that we are selfish beings, that we are inherently selfish, and we are greedy. We may remember the 1988 film Wall Street, in which the character played by Michael Douglas declares that greed is good, greed is right, and greed works. Neoliberalism says that this is just what we're like. It also says that the market is king. Neoliberalism values competition over cooperation. It says that competition is the defining characteristic of human relations, and that we should live in a system of winners and losers, sometimes known as capitalism. And it's within a rigged system which is called a meritocracy. So going back to Tony Foote, the historian, he says that most university graduates in the 1950s and 1960s saw themselves using their skills and their learning, in general terms, in aid of public service. Self-value was tied to community service, he says. By the 1980s, and this is the shift into neoliberalism, just says that graduate aspirations were all about making as much money as possible. Now, Roger, are you going to try and disrupt my statements? You are, aren't you?
Roger.
Yeah, so that brings us to, well, if you want to know a bit more about all that, there's a good series on YouTube called Century of the Self. It is 4 hours long, but it's well worth watching. It tells the story about the move, the transformation from human need into human wants. It's really interesting. And you can also see a shorter film called The Story of Stuff, which is really interesting. So that brings us to consumerism. Consumerism is an ideology, although not many people think of it that way, which makes it a very good ideology indeed. And the ideology of consumerism tells us that our well-being is tied to us having lots and lots of stuff. Having stuff is a status symbol. The richer we are, the more stuff we have. Monbiot claims that the corporate world sells stuff to us via celebrities and a kind of shallow, come on then, Rouge. Come on. There, well done.
Just for those who are curious, Roger's currently being disrupted by his cat friend, which I think is a brilliant element of this debate. So I say, Roger, keep at it. Scratch your legs and everything right when you're making points.
Who's been asleep all day until now. So Monbiot talks about celebrity culture. We see this now in the vegan community. We know something is good because some rich celeb tells us so. Celebrities provide a mask for ruthless corporations to hide behind, Monbiot claims. And one thing within the movement that illustrates this, and you can Google image this, is the London Greenpeace image at the front of their infamous leaflet called What's Wrong with McDonald's? And it shows Ronald McDonald mask hiding a kind of corporate structure. So finally, capitalism. Capitalism, Monbiot argues, is inherently incompatible with the survival of our life support system. In other words, life on Earth. Capitalism is based on winners and losers, rulers and followers, rich and poor. Of course, it promises the poor that they too can become rich. The economic growth that would entail would require the planetary resources to inflate like a balloon, which of course it cannot because our resources are finite. Capitalism is based on economic growth when the survival of our planet, our habitat, requires massive degrowth. So I want just to finish off by reading from the beginning of my chapter in this book, which is David Nybert's collection. And I started off with a quote which goes, in a video entitled Understanding Sociology, Making Sense of Sociological Theory, Anthony Giddens, who's a famous sociologist, explains what he regards as the chief defining characteristic of the capitalist economic system. And he says it's everything can be bought and sold. And the narrator of the video adds, including people. When Anthony Nocella II gave a presentation to my group, the Vegan Information Project, in 2014. He said that, this is bringing it back to our movement now, he says that when people in progressive movements are asked, what's wrong with vegan animal rights people, they answer things like, they just don't get capitalism. So he says that this is a modern day movement problem for us, that we, in the eyes of progressive movements, are just not taken seriously. Nocella says that they have good reason not to. Quote, this is a quote from his presentation. We have to acknowledge right off the bat that animal rights people are very single issue. Maybe not the people in this room, but there are a lot of other people like Peter that give you all a bad name. For the moment you walk into a room, they think, this is progressive people, you are a member of Peter, right? So they think you are sexist, ableist, and racist. Right off the back, they think you're vegan and you don't get other issues. They might even think that you're a Republican, a conservative, or neo-Nazi. So that's Nocella's take on it. And the final line comes from this book by David Nybert, when he says this. He says, the answer to the question by philosopher and activist Susan Finson, posed in chapter 1 of the book, is corporate capitalism compatible with animal rights, is no. For that matter, corporate capitalism is not compatible with the end of racism, sexism, classism, and other injustices. Now, what Nybert would argue is that what we would then need is a genuine form of socialism, which some people would argue with in the sense that some anarchists would argue with that, for example. But that's the general problem that we've got. Our values, vegan values, where do they fit? What does it align to in the political spectrum? And can they align with conservative values? And the answer seems to be, for me, no. So, Jeremy.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I think that helps frame the conversation well. I know the preparation I've done for this is more in the detail that I think we can unpack together. I mean, there's several different ways to approach this question, isn't there? I mean, to me, it's first, like you say, about values, and I think those are important questions to be asking. The first question I would be asking is, can people hold inconsistent values? I don't know any animal advocate who would argue against this, because look at how many so-called animal lovers still support animal use. So even if we were to take the position, which I think you've made a good case for, that there is some potential inconsistencies in the values, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't hold these inconsistent values at the same time. So there's that. I mean, I think another thing that's going to inevitably come up throughout this conversation, and which has been circling the animal circles, is whether or not veganism is political. And the chat that one of our fellow co-hosts of the Animal Rights Show, Tom Gilbatten, took part in recently. Catherine Klein was also on that chat, and I really liked how she said that it's political but nonpartisan, which really speaks to me. Because I think, I mean, I've said the chat has been absolutely booming. So, for those watching, hopefully, we can tie in as much with the chat as much as possible, so we can keep along similar threads. Because, I mean, something that's been raised is, is anybody that votes vegan? Because I think when we look at political parties in general, none of them really support the idea of animal rights as, non-rhetorical animal rights, the whole theme behind the Animal Rights Show. The best we can hope for is animal welfare. So what are we actually talking about now? Do different parties tend to vote along different lines? Absolutely. I've seen that discussed in the chat as well. I will definitely put my hand up and say and agree that, different parties tend to lean different ways, but it's either really leaning towards animal rights, or are they actually just different versions of animal welfare? I mean, I think we'll get into the detail in a moment. I think that will help answer that question a little bit better, but kind of leaves the question, if we're going to say conservatives can't be vegan, can anyone be vegan? I mean, the Green Party, can they be vegan? Because they're not necessarily supportive of animal rights in a direct sense. Labor's not, speaking in UK terms. Shifting to the US, Democrats, Republicans, who's the vegan party there? Looking around the world, what is the mainstream political party that is in full support of animal rights, non-rhetorical animal rights. I can't think of anyone. If anyone knows of one, please share it in the chat. But to me, it doesn't exist. So really, we're talking about differences in degree, not in kind. All of the mainstream political parties are obviously different degrees, but they're all opposed to animal rights in a sense because, let's be honest, they follow society, they don't lead it. So I think, let's just make sure I've kind of got all the notes I've been taking here. I think another big key question here is we're going to kind of break this conversation down into two parts. First, the theoretical, and we're going to look at some definitions here, which I think will be interesting. Is it even possible? Are the values just too inconsistent? But then secondarily, how do we approach this from a practical or from a strategic perspective? If we're doing outreach on the street and we, for whatever reason, we come to the knowledge that the other person's conservative, do we just say, oh, you know what? You can't be vegan, and then send them on their way? Do we, in social media circles, if someone, says they're conservative, do we say, oh, well, you can't be vegan and conservative, and then shun them in that sense before we even start to have those conversations like Roger's just done with the, inviting the different ideas around values? So, I think the whole idea is just really to get us all thinking about this. I don't think we'll necessarily have an answer at the end of the session, but hopefully just through the conversation, we can get us all thinking about these important topics that as a social movement, I think it's essential to understand our values and how to communicate those values to others. Because I think Roger and I are in agreement that we want to inspire as many people to be vegan as possible, with the caveat that while people that may have inconsistent views, we want to be able to challenge those views, but also not welcome people in with oppressive views. I think we'd also agree on that. So I think I see this us converging a lot. While we may start out at a bit different points, I see there being common ground between these two perspectives. And I hope if Roger and I can find common ground here today, that perhaps we can nudge a lot of people within the movement towards finding common ground, because I think that's what's seriously lacking on a lot of these pivotal issues is actually looking at the practical applications and where do we agree and where we don't. Because as animal advocates, I think we agree on a heck of a lot more than what we don't agree on. So I guess to me, the question is, can people hold inconsistent views? And I think if that's true, then surely a conservative can be vegan, even if we agree that's the stance in the first place. So,
well, I think we might agree that cat friends can be very disruptive. I'm being terrorized here by a cat. Well, I did say in my kind of opening thoughts that it's not about party politics, although I see that quite a lot of the comments are about party politics. I think it's more to do with values. Can you put up the Steve Best thing for me, Jeremy?
I can, but just before we do that, when you say it's not about party politics, isn't that what this debate is all about? Is saying that a certain party cannot be vegan? Unless your premise is that no political party can be vegan, which I think has been gestured at a few times.
Yeah, well, I see the thing about, can you be vegan? And I said no, but it's not as though we've got some kind of entry form and you've got to fill it in. It's to do with what values align with vegan values. That's the issue for me, and that was the issue that Steve Best raised in his kind of infamous or famous Luxembourg talk. And so it seems to me that, one interesting thing is whether we as a group here and people in the chat would even agree with how he characterized left-leaning values and left and right-leaning values, because I think some people might actually dispute that. But in terms of what he was getting at is that we are a left-leaning movement, and these are our values. Right-leaning values are something else, and they're not compatible with vegan values. And so it's really asking people of the right to examine their values in the light of vegan values and see how they would marry together. And so Best would say, first of all, we should preface that just before this, he said I don't care. I don't care about the way you vote. And he goes, this movement is a left-wing movement, right? And he says that we embrace left values like equality, democracy, inclusivity, non-discrimination, non-hierarchy, rights, justice, peace, and non-violence. And he says, where the hell do you think those came from? These came from the left and the radical progressive movements. And he says, on the other hand, right-wing values are hierarchy, military, family, nation, borders, war, and security. Now, family, we might need to deconstruct because that often creates a bit of confusion. But he says this is not what we talk about. These are not our values. It's opposite to our values. And so what he's saying is that vegans have a set of values which align with the values of the left. Also, it's important to say that when he talked about the left, he talks about what we might regard as the far left or the hard left, communists, anarchists, right up to what he called kind of left-leaning liberals. So in itself, that was quite a broad church. It's just that it doesn't include those who would have right values, like your Donald Trump. So the idea that we've got vegans for Trump is a complete contradiction to me. I mean, the vegan conservatives at least didn't say they're vegans for Boris, but the idea that anyone could vote for Donald Trump after the grab a pussy stuff and all the other stuff that he did, calling Mexicans rapists and all the rest of it, is just a mystery to me. But they don't also align with vegan values, because Trump goes against everything we stand for.
I hear what you're saying, but I think I don't think that's fully capturing the reality of the situation, in the sense that if someone, so many of voters, I mean, I don't have the statistics in front of me. If anyone in the chat has the statistics they can share, please do. But so many people vote for the same party almost every election. So it does, I mean, it literally doesn't matter in a lot of senses. Now, I think recent developments in the US and other places, I think, have changed that. But I don't think that it's absolutely right that, you know, some of the things you're talking about, not vegan values, but I don't think that's why people vote for, you know, these individuals. So, and I think it's been raised a number of times, the comparison between Biden and Trump. Is Biden really that much better when we get into animal rights topics? I would say he's better in degrees, but not in kind. You know, we're not going to see a vegan world under Biden either.
No. Well, we're not going to find a vegan world under any current political system, because every political system is within a cultural species ideology at the moment, and so that's the bar to that. We're back to what our main target is, which is cultural speciesism. But those people didn't call themselves Republican vegans. I mean, the British group, they've called themselves, was it conservative vegans or vegan conservatives? So we
can go to that site in a minute. I think that would be an interesting.
Yeah, so they didn't call themselves vegans for Boris, but the Trump people call themselves vegans for Trump. Now, how can that even be? That a group of vegans would think that they can be vegan and adhere to vegan values. Now, what could be happening, and I think this is what someone like Ronnie might be thinking, is that this is where the confusion between plant-based and vegan comes in. You know, and so, I mean, the interesting thing for me is that there's been a couple of models talked about lately. Someone recently said that they want everybody in the world to be vegan. But then if they do express homophobic views and racist views, they should be called out on that. Someone else said that the idea is to get everybody plant-based and then see if we can move them towards veganism. It's that latter view that makes more sense to me, because people with right-wing views in a way can't become vegan if they continue to hold those views, because they're incompatible. But it doesn't mean that they can't change.
Yeah, Tom's just saying his proposed naming is plant-based for Trump.
Mm.
But I think because as you and a lot of the listeners know, I'm passionate about language and framing of this stuff. I think when we look at the January, I mean, I personally don't like plant-based in and of itself, because I just shared something to our internal chat today around, I think a lot of people think plant-based still means you eat the odd, eat something from an animal every now and then, because that whole base thing. I think you've suggested from somebody else that said, referring to plant diet. Isn't that what we're really talking about? We're not talking about basing things on plants. We're talking about literally exclusively plants. But that's still just the dietary aspect. So, I mean, I think it was Guywan earlier who said, I mean, aren't we really talking about the... I may be actually confusing the comments, but the net point is, aren't we really talking about the focus versus the scope, not necessarily just the dietary aspect? Because I think that's what because there's a lot of people that would identify as opposing animal use, but wouldn't fit your model of the scope. Isn't that what we're really talking about?
Well, I don't know. On the front page of the Vegan Conservative website, they make it
Should
clear.
we go there?
Yeah, it's not the About Us one; it's their front page, but they make it clear that they are talking about veganism as a diet and a health issue. Yeah, if you scroll right to the bottom of that, why vegan? Okay, so
I need to make this bigger for people, I imagine.
Yeah, so the why vegan bit on that makes it clear that they're not talking about veganism. It's a little bit like veganuary, you know, like I can understand why veganuary has that title. It's catchy, although ironically a lot of journalists can't say it. But in terms of their claims making, their text, I don't think they should use phrases like "try vegan for a month." I think that's when "try plant exclusive" or "plant-based for a month" is more accurate. And here they're saying, I mean, it's a really interesting one, because
it's definitely food and environment. Yeah,
but also this thing about we picked this out before we came on air, Jeremy. This thing about across the rich world. What are they trying to say there? The rich world.
Yeah. That's not exactly inclusive language, is it? But we could have a look at that one. Well, I think, to be fair, because we also saw on this section.
Yeah, this is really interesting.
This is some of the best language, I think. I mean, this is better than a lot of animal groups, I would posit.
Yeah, it is.
Animals are conscious, sentient beings. They have lives of their own, and they do not want themselves or their offspring to be killed. Now, I think that the focus on breeding is sorely lacking in the movement, which we don't have to worry about killing them if we're not breeding them in the first place. But taking that out of it, I mean, this is a rights-based claim here. You know, this fits into the theme of the animal rights show. This is the niche of the movement.
Yeah, but
right
they
here.
don't talk about animal rights, do they, Jeremy? They talk about animal welfare. That's their headline: animal welfare. The only place that they
overtly
talk about rights is when they're alluding to the humans.
We're talking about a political group. Isn't that a political move, though? Because animal welfare has different connotations associated with it than animal rights.
Well, I just think it's really interesting that, I mean, there is a group that, I mean, if you just scroll down to the next block below, they talk about rights then, and like, you know, that is kind of quite refreshing. But when you read it, I think it's probably, see that bit about individual rights, right? The core tenet of conservatives in respect for the rights of individuals. And as I said, I think that gets us into Sandra Higgins kind of territory, because I think they're talking about humans. So in terms of rights, they're talking about human rights, and in terms of other animals, they're talking about animal welfare. And so that initial statement that you picked out right at the top is very strong, except it would feed into an animal rights position, but their position isn't animal rights, it's animal welfare. So it's a confused position at best.
Are you suggesting that this paragraph specifically gestures at the welfare through the use of the word treatment, or just in general through their policies?
No, I was talking about the top. No, I'm saying that their beginning thing says. Our aim is to promote veganism for the benefit of human health, animal welfare, and the environment within the conservatives. So they're talking about acting as a a caucus within the Conservative Party. But they're trying to their claims making is under the banner headline of animal welfare. The only time when they talk about individual rights is when they talk about humans.
Okay, so clearly on this website, though, their stance would be that theoretically speaking, there's some overlap of values. Which would you think that's a fair statement? There's overlap of values. It's just not as overlapping as perhaps other partisan groups, which coincidentally, I think you said earlier, isn't what we're talking about. Which, from my view, it is. You getting attacked by your cat friend?
I am.
I paid Rouger off before the debate, so you get scratched up while you're doing this. So would your position be that there is overlap in values, but it's less so than with other parties? Is that kind of where you're coming at things?
No. I mean, no, because if they're framing it under the, if they're thinking about their claims making under the banner of animal welfare, then that's not veganism. As Laser Cross says, we're not about welfare. We're more about rights. We're not about welfare. We're more about liberation. We're on the side of the liberators. They wouldn't use that kind of language. They're much more, like I say, when they talk about rights, they talk about human rights. When they talk about other animals, they talk about welfare. So it's an animal welfare position. I mean, you might say it's strategic, but I mean, I would think that they're probably much more in line with the vegan strategists than they are with the animal rights debate at the animal rights show.
Well, maybe so. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this article. I'm not a native to the UK. I've only been here for 6 years or so. So this was some quick and fast research because I know most of our viewers do happen to be in the UK. So I wanted to speak to that. I think there's probably analogies that can be drawn to other parts of the world. But with that framing, I mean, this article is a year old. I know some of these issues have been updated, but there is, I think maybe we could go through this a little bit because I think this will help highlight some of these positions, because this is a little bit of a grid that Roger and I have looked at in advance, which basically breaks down this article. Now, at the end of the article, I encourage you to check it out for yourself. I can link it if anybody's interested. There's some specific animal issues afterwards, but basically it goes through these issues, as you can see in the left column: badgers, live export, trophy hunting, and so on. A lot of speciesist language here as well, but then breaks it down between these three parties, because I think most of the, and myself included, before doing this, I would have thought that the Green Party would be the best on a lot of these issues, and maybe the position's been updated so that is the case, but at least as of when this article was written, the way I read it, it actually looked neutral or even worse compared to Labour. So what are we actually saying here? So if your position is that conservatives cannot be vegan, can liberals, or Labour as they're known in the UK, be vegan? Can the third party or Green Party be vegan? Because specifically looking at the badger call, as of this article, I don't know if it's changed, but my understanding is they've stopped pressuring to reverse the ban, which is, it's more of a neutral position, but they are giving, the reason it's in red is because they are giving the go-ahead, whereas Labour is saying to stop it. They weren't specific about what they meant by non-lethal interventions. However, the Green Party specifically talked about vaccinations for so-called cattle. So now we're talking about animal testing. So we're swapping out killing badgers for animal testing. That's not an animal rights position. So who actually, like the kids games, spot the vegan. Which of these three columns is the vegan column?
None. But
really the question isn't so much can conservatives be vegan, but can anyone who votes be vegan, right?
The question is that there are vegan values, and that to be vegan means adhering to vegan values. And so if you don't adhere to vegan values, then you're not accepting the philosophy of veganism. And you can apply that to anybody you like. But back to the thrust of the question, though, if not, so is the position that liberals can't be vegan and Green Party supporters can't be vegan? Well, it's a kind of issue that which are the most likely to adhere to vegan values, and the chances are that you're going to get very few people who adhere to conservative values adhering to vegan values because they clash. The other ones are more of a kind of area where you can then get into things like alliance politics, but also in terms of education. But there's nothing wrong with vegans educating conservatives. Obviously, I also want everybody to become vegan, as we were talking about before. But the problem is, people can't become vegan and keep the same values that they've got already. I mean, the vegan strategist argues that you can become vegan and still eat eggs and fishes. Well, that's not becoming vegan. And so,
that's not what we're talking about here, though, is it? We're talking about whether someone from a conservative party,
the set of values.
We're talking about someone who's consistently, on the focus of veganism. Now we can argue about whether the scope aligns with these political parties or not, but the focus, if they're aligning with the focus, not the eating things occasionally, but if they're aligned on the focus, is that, still, are we going to try to make the claim that they can't be vegan? That actually, I think is highly probable. I think that, it's one thing to talk about that within vegan circles to try to understand it, but when we're posting on social media that, oh, mate, you can't be vegan because you're conservative, that's where I think we've got an issue.
The thing is, though, you're in danger there of doing what the likes of AV want to do, which is make the focus the scope. Now, the focus is the focus, but you never kind of completely blank out the scope of things, and the scope and the focus together define the kind of politics.
Are we conflating individual interpretations of veganism with animal movement groups setting the driving forward of a social movement? To me, those are two very different questions. Well,
I'd say that what we're doing is, obviously I'm going to say this, but what I'd say is that you've got an authentic articulation of vegan values being challenged now by reducitarian versions, and those reducitarian versions are the product of all kinds of political reasons, not least. Some talk about strategy, foot in the door, and this kind of stuff, but you've got others who want to reduce the scope of veganism, or eliminate the scope and make the focus the scope, because they do tend to have right-wing views.
Which could be by accident, because some of the things I've seen, I think, honestly, their awareness of the issues isn't great to begin with.
Come on, Jeremy. Do you think anybody that adheres to vegan values would get involved with the kind of crackpot idea of offering Donald Trump $1 million to go vegan for a month? And they only did that because the Pope had already said, no, let's pick out two of the richest people on the fucking planet and give them $1 million, right? And how does that? How does that work on any kind of level at all? In terms of,
I'd advocate for us staying away from crackpots in general, but. I hear you're saying. I think we agree that as vegans, as political parties, we have different values. I agree with that. There's a whole spectrum, and people who vote a certain way doesn't necessarily mean they this is a pretty complex analysis here. There's several different issues that people who vote
for one of these three options. Values. It's not about voting. It's about values.
So how do we define who a conservative is?
Well, I know this is the way that we've framed it in terms of this debate, and
you agreed to the framing of the debate already. We can't go framing.
I'm not disputing any. But at heart, which is what I said in my opening statement, at heart we talk about our values, which is what Steve Best was talking about. And again, if you go back to things like Ronnie has got a video, there's no such thing as a right-wing vegan. Okay, and basically he's saying that the values don't fit. Those two things don't fit together. There's got to be
a very different.
You've either got to shift vegan values to allow the entry of the right into it, or the right have to switch their values in order to align themselves with vegan values. They can't just coexist together, not least because it makes it an unsafe place for people with progressive politics.
depending where we're talking about on the spectrum of conservative values. If we're talking about centrist conservative values, I think some of the oppressive things you're talking about are going to be a lot less of a point. Well, I mean, that to me it really isn't the point. I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's just I just when we say a group can't be vegan, I mean, so would you sign off on the statement that liberals can't be vegan?
No one. People who adhere to vegan values are vegans. Those who don't are not vegan.
With respect, sir, I feel like you're swerving the points.
No. I mean, it's just the fact that we've. I mean, like, if you're saying which one can be vegan, Biden or Trump or Starmer or Boris Johnson, well, none of them adhere to vegan values. So that's why I said it's not about party politics. It's about values. And I know we've framed it this way because of the advent of the vegan conservative caucus. I understand that.
Okay.
But it's just that ultimately we're talking about our movement and our claims, which are based on our values, which are about justice for all. It's about peace. It's about non-violence. We've got to then say, well, this is what we stand for. Who agrees with that? You can't just then say everybody in, regardless of what you think.
Well, I think this maybe moves us into. I made these banners, so we might as well use them. The practical side, because to me, it's very different saying this isn't possible, or, the whole conservatives can't be vegan, versus conservatives are less likely to be vegan, or maybe there's specific challenges to maybe outreaching conservative values, especially strong conservative values.
How can how can conservatives be vegan, Jeremy?
Well, by your definition, no one who votes can be vegan. We're only talking about anarchists or people who abstain from the political process. Is that a fair statement?
No, of course not.
Okay, so back to the question. So can liberals be vegan?
Well, I think. Well, you see, I think it depends on the individual's values, and I think when you talk about contradictions, I think some people do vote for things for all kinds of weird reasons, not least things like family tradition and that kind of stuff. But they're almost like voting against their values. Okay, well, this is why I don't particularly want to have a conversation about party politics. I mean, I think most politics are subsumed under the ideology of cultural speciesism, and so we're not going to get anywhere through the political parties at the moment. We've got to bring about cultural change before we can do that. You said yourself that politicians tend to be followers and not leaders. Can I just address one little point? And I've seen it repeatedly in the chat. Yes.
And I apologize for not giving the chat our normal attention, but we did caveat that we would be focused more on the live discussion. So we will come back to the chat more in the end.
I want just to say that I quoted George Monbiot. I'm not saying that George Monbiot is vegan. I'm just saying that I quoted some of his stuff, and I kind of like followed in general terms his model. It is true that he kills deers, and he seems to have a kind of I'm vegan, I'm not, I'm vegan, I'm not kind of thing. Interestingly, funny enough, he seems to have a position that of human exceptionalism, which explains his position. He thinks that humans are by nature altruistic and other animals are not. So I'm not saying I align with George Monbiot. I'm just saying that I use his model where he talked about capitalism, neoliberalism, and consumerism. That's all. I'm not saying that I'm a fan of George Monbiot.
All right, and real quickly, I think I don't want to feed a fed horse here, but it sounds like we largely. You like that?
I need to feed an unfed cat soon, I think.
To that point, if those who are interested in language, I'll pop something up on the screen for a great group to join. But it sounds like we agree that these these party politics, which I think we're both agreed we don't want to do an in-depth dive into those today. It's more of a high-level discussion.
Well, you raised party politics. I said in my statement it's not about party politics. It's about values.
Well, and the framing of the debate itself is, can conservatives be vegan? It's not, can politicians be vegan?
Can people with conservative values be vegan?
We could. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, like, to your point though, people don't necessarily, when they vote for someone, they oftentimes sacrifice their values. In some ways, it's rare to find a politician where you go through the 20 or 100 different main issues and you're like, yeah, I agree with this person on everything. There's always,
people change, and we're about creating change in people. We're about creating change in the culture. That means we've got to change people. People do change. Tom Regan was a butcher. We know that. There's been several butchers in the British animal movement. Several people who were butchers, I should say. And so people do change. That's not the point now. We can welcome conservatives into the vegan movement once they jettison conservative values.
To our point, though, what's conservative values?
Bring them in before that. That's what I'm saying. We can't have them in there. See, this is the kind of thing. Oh, I want men's rights activists marching alongside feminists. This kind of stuff. This doesn't work. Also, it doesn't.
I'm not making that claim, just to be clear.
I know that, but we can't bring them in unless something changes. The way that some people in the vegan movement are trying to marry these two ideas together is by diluting what veganism means, so we're not scaring the conservatives away. Well, bugger that. From my point of view, veganism means something very good. It's about justice. We stick by it. We stand by it. And if people don't align with that, then they're not vegan. And it's as simple as that.
We're conflating men's rights activists with conservatives. I don't think that's I think that's a false comparison from my view.
I'm going back to values. People hold a set of values. Are they in line with vegan values? Which, I mean, I've argued. I've written a series about this, about the people who began the movement. They had a set of radical values, anti-establishment values, anti-authoritarian values, revolutionary values. And I'm not saying that their views are law. Must make that clear. I'm not, because social movements do move. I understand that. It's not as though their views can be challenged. In fact, their views should be challenged because their language is terribly sexist. So we've got to challenge, the same way as we can challenge Tom Regan. I mean, some things that Tom Regan say are not particularly good. But in terms of what they stood for, that established kind of vegan values. And those values, I tend to summarize as justice for all. And like I say,
well, I think there'd be a lot of conservatives that would suggest they support justice too. And I think, just real quickly, so I can get this massive rainbow Excel sheet off the screen, there's just one last point I wanted to make, because I think we generally agree, although I appreciate we could probably stay on this point longer. I just think it's interesting when we look at the hunting column, because I kind of alluded to that in the opening, that according to this, and this was December 2019, UK based, that they abandoned the free vote to abandon basically the repeal of hunting. Labor pledges to boost the enforcement and extend it to all free living beings, which sounds good. But the Green Party is one that just really baffled me, because I thought they would be a standout in this. They talk about boosting the enforcement, but then this is a direct quote from the article. I don't know if this is going to be big enough for people to be able to read it, so I'll read it out loud. Where necessary for ecological reasons, humane culling will be licensed by Natural England and carried out by trained professionals. So this is the Green Party we're talking about here. I mean, this couldn't get further away from our animal rights as far as I'm concerned. Now, if we're going to start talking about the difference between veganism and non-rhetorical animal rights, we can do that, but I just had to make that point, because I think if we're going to start saying conservatives can't be vegan, which I appreciate you're moving away from that, or it sounds like you're moving more towards values versus political parties, and I understand why you're saying that. But if we're going to say that conservatives can't be vegan, I don't know how the heck we're going to say the Green Party is vegan either.
No,
or labor
well,
for
the
that
thing is,
matter, if we start looking at some
the
of
Green
these.
Party, I think people pointed this out in the comment, and somebody made a comment about the Irish Green Party. I mean, the Green Party are now in the business of kind of making coalitions with right-wing parties. I mean, in a sense, the Green Party have completely sold out. There was a time, especially in Germany, as I've said before, in the 1980s, when the Green Party was very strong, started to get quite a lot of electoral success and public support. And they had what you might call dark green policies. What tends to happen there is that those policies get squashed down and appropriated by the bigger parties. And so the bigger parties came out with light green policies, and that was enough to buy people off. And so that completely destroyed the support base, probably the finances, of the Green Party. And that's happened in Germany, it's happened in Britain, and it's happened in Ireland, to the extent now that the Green Party, which started off as a lobby group, has almost like become again a lobby group with a couple of MPs or TDs or whatever you call them in mainland Europe. I'm not quite sure, representatives perhaps. So, but again, that's party politics, and so that's I prefer to talk about our values and what our values align with, which is where I started. Our values got to mean something. We can't bend them completely in order to just. We're not the vegan strategist here. You can enter the vegan movement, and you can still eat fishes and eggs. We'll lower the bar for you. Now, veganism surely got to mean something.
And you'll get no. I think you'll get no disagreement from me there. I think where I question is if we're not talking about party politics, what efficacy, what value, what strategy does the statement "conservatives can't be vegan" bring to the movement? I mean, are we trying to gatekeep and say, hey, here are our values, and make it draw a strong line in the sand? But what is the real life extrapolation from that? I think we're shunning people before we even have the opportunity to have these conversations.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you're saying there. If you're saying welcome everybody and then you have chats with them about their
not
values.
Not everyone. I would put the asterisk of oppressive views. Obviously, we need to have a strong stance on that. But we're talking about conservatives, and I don't think conservatives should be conflated with oppressive views. Full stop.
Well, I mean, I think that when you get people with strong immigration policies, this is the borders bit of conservative values that Steve Best has. I mean, at the moment, I was just on. If we go to British party politics for a second, I was listening to late night radio. There was an immigration expert on, and he was saying that there's always been a difference between entering what was called the UK, the not United Kingdom, as a worker, and it was one thing for people in the EU and another thing for the rest of the world. What Brexit has done is make entry into Britain as difficult for people in the EU now as it is for the rest of the world, and it's also much more selective. It means that it keeps families apart. It means that Britain now can cherry pick what they regard as skilled workers, and those skilled workers can come from all over the world now, but they've always been able to do that. It's just that unskilled workers used to be able to come from Europe. Now they can't. Are we
talking party politics? I thought you said you didn't want to talk party politics.
No, I just said that for a minute. We can talk about what I'm saying is that some political views and some voting intentions. I mean, some of the people in this vegan conservative group are voted against voted for the badger cull. So what's going on here? I mean, that's because they think of veganism as a diet, I think.
Well, and again, I think to me there's a clear distinction between the way I'd frame it, starting to live vegan through Veganuary, and people who oppose animal use. Because again, the dietary aspect, I think your point is, even if people aren't wearing skin from other animals, aren't going to entertainment from other animals, they're still not consistent with vegan values because of these other things. So I think we're talking about beyond diet here. So I'm not sure the plant-based diet framing necessarily addresses all of it.
Well, we looked at their front page, didn't we, where they talk about diet.
Well, and then we looked at the About Us, which has some of the strongest rights. It's saying what it is. It has the strongest, rights framing, stronger than most animal groups.
No, you're saying it's got a rights framing. The headline is animal welfare. The rights bit is when they talk about humans. It's very difficult to concentrate when you're doing this.
Who's distracting you? Is that because of the
She's
individuals?
been scratching me for about an hour.
But hang on. What makes you think this is human centric? I've got it here. What about this is human centric?
Well, because I mentioned Sandra Higgins and the problem that Sandra had when she was on that TV show, when she used words like individuals, they had to point out that she was talking about the other animals, and so
isn't that buying it? Isn't that buying into the species' ideology that other animals are individuals? Is your suggestion that they're only referring to humans here?
I think they're only they are alluding to conservative values about the rights of individuals, but they're talking about humans.
Human individuals.
Humans, yeah.
Because I read this through an animal rights lens as including other animals.
I think that first statement is about humans.
Well, I guess their whole perspective, though, is that we're all about rights of the individual. Why not talk about it when it comes to other animals?
Okay, so
sentient living beings. They're obviously bridging the gap. They're obviously bridging the species gap here. I don't think this is human centric at all. They might be building off that, and I agree a lot. Especially human centric thinking would definitely interpret it the way you are, but I don't think that's the sum total of what they're saying here. I think it goes much beyond diet, at least based on this.
Yeah, well, I was talking about their use of individual rights under the headline of animal welfare. It's a confused position. But I mean,
maybe on a future show we can break it down more about what the actual welfare component is. This is much more rights based to me.
Oh yeah, I said that, and I said when we looked at the first thing as well that I agree with you that in terms of just if we take these out in isolation, some of these claims are better than a lot of the claims. I mean, you don't see anything as good as this in, say, Animal Aid, for example, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to take a look at specific websites to be able to opine on that. But we've been going for about an hour. I don't know. My thought is we take a bit of a temperature in the room, or we could do another poll, or alternatively, we can go through some comments and then do another poll. I don't know where you're leaning, Roger. Do you feel like you feel like you've made your case for the most part, or?
Well, I'm just reading that I'm supposed to have some elimination rules. I'm in some senses I'm kind of social movement entry is dependent on people adhering to the values of the social movement. Like I've always given that example that if the Marxist movement was like the vegan movement, you'd get some people going in to the Marxist movement and going, oh, I don't care what this guy Marx said. Marxism to me is X, Y, and Z, which is exactly how people respond to the vegan movement, as though the definition of veganism is so elastic that they can bend it and twist it and everything, reduce it to their own politics, rather than saying, well, that is the vegan movement, that is its values. Do I adhere with them or not? Now, I don't see that.
We're aligned that this paragraph aligns, though, right? I'm not seeing okay. If we start looking at voting records, I completely agree, and I think we both agree that any political party is going to have delineation from what we would consider vegan values. But that to me doesn't answer the point. The point is, can conservatives be vegan? Unless we're completely abstaining from the political process in general, I don't know how we can make these sweeping statements that don't just shun a lot of people. Like I absolutely agree. If values, challenge the values, and I would say challenge them not just that they come up, but just everywhere. We should challenge the values, but I'm just not sure saying they can't be vegan is how to do it.
You see, no, I don't think they can't be vegan. I think that they're not vegan. And so it's kind of like,
Okay, that's a fair distinction. So what would it take? So if they stopped voting conservative, and I know we've said whether it's about voting or not, but if they stop voting conservative, start voting liberal, now they can be vegan.
it depends on whether they adhere to and agree with vegan values, doesn't it? It's like everything. If a conservative goes across the House and joins the Labour Party, they switch their allegiances with one set of political values to another. This would entail, and this is for the general public, that you as a speciesist will learn about anti-speciesism and veganism, and you then switch your values to be in line with vegan values. That's what becoming a vegan means, isn't it?
I mean, I'm seeing in the chat here. I mean, I think the question is, can conservatives be vegan? So you're saying that they cannot be vegan. So what would it take for them to be able to pass the mark to be vegan? And that's where I think when we get into this gatekeeping, I just think we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, gatekeeping is part and parcel of all social movements. I mean, that's like saying, the feminist movement doesn't gatekeep. Well, of course it does. I mean, we
should probably clarify what we mean by gatekeeping. I'm talking about sweeping statements that if you vote for this party, you cannot be part of our movement, which is what I understand your claim is.
How many times do I have to say that it's not about voting, and that's what Steve Best said. It's about what values you adhere to.
How do we know what values someone adheres to besides their voting, though? Isn't that what we're talking about? We're not doing private surveys if they have conservative values. They're going to the voting box and voting for a conservative representative. I don't know how else we're going to interpret that.
Well, it kind of the chances of them holding those values and vegan values simultaneously, I mean, like, it's difficult to actually get your head around how that could be. Okay, and so if people with those values want to enter the vegan movement, they have to shift their values to align with vegan values, or vegan values have to be diluted to allow entry of those type of people in, doesn't it? Veganism's got to mean something.
People have different values across the board. I mean, let's start talking about vaccines, vegan cats, and the rest of it. I mean, if we're going to start to say these are the values of veganism, get out if you don't align with them. I think that's I think.
No, I think. I mean, I do get the drift of what you're saying, and yes, there are. I think there is shift, and there's movements within a social movement in terms of that. There is some shift in the same ways that there is within a political party, but we're in the same thing, because we're developing, evolving a set of values, and also propounding those values to the general public. And we're saying this is us, the vegans. Aren't we great? Come and join, right? And then it's a question of the people then, as it were, knocking on your door. You're kind of thinking, do those values align with vegan values? So gatekeeping is I know gatekeeping sounds negative, but it's inevitable, whether you're a political party or a social movement. Like not everybody. Like Donald Trump walks into the feminist movement and goes, right, I'm a feminist. I think the feminists might go, well, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think gatekeeping is a sweeping term. I'll concede that. I think just that statement, conservatives cannot be vegan, I'm just not sure what that gets us, and that's why I keep coming back to that from a practical perspective.
People with conservative values.
Because I don't. How many? Well, let me just expand real quickly. How many people that read that who are conservative interpret that, hey, you know what? Maybe my values aren't consistent with veganism, or how many people think that actually the vegans aren't going to welcome me because I'm conservative? And we're not talking about oppressive far-right conservative views. We're talking about centrist that encompasses the bulk of the party.
Well, if you're talking about the center of politics, if you're thinking about the political spectrum, that is an interesting area of debate. Now, if you like, I'll concede that, because it is interesting where you've got issues of, well, you probably wouldn't get it with words like social. I mean, like everything is kind of like moved right recently. I mean, that was one of the premises of Monbiot's talk, that there's been an increase in the prevalence of the alt-right and the far right, and that's because everything has moved right. So, I mean, someone like Saunders in North America, I mean, he was seen as brave or suicidal on the grounds that he actually called himself a socialist. We've had the problems with Jeremy Corbyn being too left to fit into the Labour Party, because the way to win political power is to move to the centre. Some people would classify Boris Johnson as a bit of a kind of like one nation Tory, like Ted Heath, which again is a centre kind of position. But I mean, now we, you know, that is an interesting area.
Well, and I think that really is the thrust of my concern, because I'm not advocating for any values here today at all. It's more of a overall discussion. So if we're it sounds like we may find, you know, some common ground, in that there are some central points that maybe people, and I know you don't want to talk about the voting, but maybe people are, you know, do identify with conservative values because of their upbringing or whatever. I mean, how do we differentiate between centrist conservative values and the extremist? Because when we make sweeping statements like conservatives can't be vegan, that's exactly what we're doing. We're excluding everyone.
Maybe it's the level of oppression that they represent. As the comment,
all conservatives, all conservatives. Well, or are we talking about just certain conservatives here?
Here's an interesting one. There's a difference between disagreeing about stuff like vaccines and whether cats and dogs should be vegan, and being a racist, immigrant-hating vegan who wants all non-white people to die.
But that I again, I'm not here to defend conservative values, but I don't think that I come more from an American perspective. I'm not certainly not here to defend Trump either, but I just think when we say conservative equals those things, to me that's a disingenuous claim to be making.
If you even to think, and building on what Ronnie Lee's just said, if we want our life support system, which I mentioned in my opening thing, if we want that to survive, our habitat, what we need to survive, then conservative values really do push aggressively against that. And so it's about economic growth. It's about, you know, collecting consumables. It's about the status of being rich. All of that. Environmentally, that's really difficult. And
that's true of the center left too, isn't it? Neoliberalism and the rest. I mean, that's not a conservative unidimensional point that's being made, is it? I mean, I think we're expanding beyond the scope of the debate.
Well, that's the party that pushed that the heaviest. But again, it's that viewpoint.
Yeah.
That would push that the heaviest. It's their worldview, the neoliberal worldview. You know, the kind of no such thing as society, the kind of Thatcher kind of idea. These things make it much more difficult to think that the Earth is going to survive. I mean, I'm not quite sure whether the COVID thing has shown that human beings have got it in them to solve something like the ecological catastrophe that's going on.
We could probably do a whole other debate on that one.
Yeah, I think so. And so, you know, I just returned to vegan values, and I want to uphold them. I want to spread them. I think that vegan values. I actually agree with Donald Watson when he said that the vegan movement is the only movement that can save humanity. I think that's a true statement.
Well, and then we could talk about alliance politics and, can we do it on our own, or do we have to, do other parties? That, I think we've got 3 or 4 other debate topics we're touching on. Capitalism is obviously central to a lot, or, overlaps with a lot of this, but that to me is a separate discussion. Otherwise, we're going to go way off piste. I think to me that the key here is the framing. If we're saying no versus less likely, I think, maybe you and I are having a private discussion about whether the values align. I think it's very different than vegans screaming from the rooftops. Unless you're going to change your conservative values, stay away. I think that I mean, do you think there's value in that statement because it defends our values, or do you think there's maybe some negative contributions that statement is making?
I think that we're almost kind of duty bound if you want to be true to our values, to say to conservatives, if you want to uphold oppressive positions, then that's not going to align with our values. And so
we say that already, though. Aren't we saying something that's already being said? At least in most circles, not all circles. I appreciate there's issues within the animal movement around that, but the circles I'm familiar with already reject oppressive values. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in them. But
what are you saying? There are conservatives who reject oppressive values.
And again, I'm not speaking specific to the UK, and I'm not trying to defend those things. I just think that saying conservative equals oppressive equals racist, I just don't see how that's helpful to the discussion. Because while I appreciate those things do materialize and perhaps materialize quite frequently or more frequently than other groups, I don't think it's an all-encompassing. They have those values, so they're not they're not vegan. I just. So, do you think there's value in the statement? Can conservatives be vegan? Maybe we could focus on that, because we've kind of I think we've explained it quite thoroughly on the value side of it.
Do you
think there's efficacy on a practicable level of saying publicly conservatives cannot be vegan, which I appreciate we're doing here now?
Well, the optimistic take on that is that everyone can be vegan, but they would then need to align with vegan values in order to become vegan.
Don't we ripen up within veganism, not just going vegan? So why not give people the chance to start living vegan, even if they have these values that you're suggesting, and I would agree in large part, don't align? Why not let them identify as vegan and give them a chance to figure that out for themselves? No,
they can't, because that then makes the vegan movement unsafe for a lot of marginalized and oppressed peoples. And
for all conservatives? So you're saying anyone who identifies with conservative values brings oppression into the animal movement?
I would say that the articulation of conservative values is a really bad fit within the vegan movement. And so so if you've got somebody who is anti-immigration, kind of free market politics, the kind of things that are not gonna. I mean, part of the vegan argument is that we're going to feed everyone. Food security is a vegan issue. We've talked about this for years and years and years, that a vegan world would be able to feed every human being on the planet. Whereas a pro-capitalist position is all about maintaining the system of control, which came from divide and rule and rich and poor. And I mean, sociologists often describe capitalism as dog eat dog. I know that's not a vegan phrase, obviously, but it's kind of like who can kind of scramble up the greasy pole and all that. And winners and losers. That's one of the main characteristics. That not everybody can be on the same level. Ronnie talks about degrowth we've got to get a system where if we want to save ourselves and the planet, we've got to reduce our living standards drastically across the board. And
then we could talk about eco-capitalism as well, which, I mean, I would need to study the subject more to be prepared to have a detailed discussion on that. I'm kind of trying to figure out if there's common ground between these two positions, and what that is. Because it sounds like we agree that values are important, certain values more aligned with certain, if we're not going to talk about voting and we're not going to talk about partisan politics, I'm not sure how we get to the statement that conservatives can't be vegan. But if we are going to say that, I would then ask what the value is in that statement. I think that to me is the key of this debate. What is the value in saying they can't be vegan?
Well, look, let me do a bit of ethno on you.
Do it.
When we say, can conservatives be vegan? That statement means, correct me if I'm wrong, can conservatives be vegan if they continue to adhere to conservative values? And that's where the answer is no. Can conservatives be
even centrist conservative values? I apologize for interrupting, but it is an important point to be making because I think we're conflating a lot of ideas here. There's a whole spectrum within conservative values. I mean, we're talking about half the population roughly.
What centrist conservative values? What are you talking about?
I mean, I think a lot of people are making the jump that conservative equals racist equals anti-immigrant and all these things, which I mean, I appreciate there's, some relationships there, but I don't think that to have conservative values requires those things. I don't think they're mutually inclusive. Well, so let me posit a situation to make this more tangible. If we have a conservative who rejects racism, rejects a lot of the policies values that you suggest, well, rightly so, don't align with veganism. I mean, can you imagine a case where someone identifies with conservative values but interprets them in such a way that could actually fit underneath the vegan umbrella?
I think you'd have to give me a for instance on that. Like what exactly are we talking about here?
Well, we talked about it, for instance. We talked about it, for instance, right here. So someone who rejects a lot of the things that the conservatives, let's just say they vote for conservative, but they disagree with these things, which begs the question, why are they voting conservative? But I think it's safe to say that a lot of people who vote conservatives actually want to see some of these pro-animal things come into place. And it brings us back to our original point that these differ in degree, not in kind. We're not going to see the change in politics to begin with. Now, when we talk about subsidies, I mean, maybe some of the parties, I mean, I'd probably guess that certain parties are probably more likely to stop subsidies, which is a huge issue. I think we're teed up to have a debate about that at some point, or a discussion. I just...
You're bringing me back to party politics again.
Well, I just... The shift from conservative values to voting for conservative, to me, isn't as vast a gap as I think you're making it out to be.
But in that, you see, you put that document up as a for instance of conservative values that can marry with veganism. Is that what you did?
Yeah, I mean, primates as pets. They both pledged a ban. I mean, okay, again, I'm not here to defend conservative values. I just think that it's just because someone, I won't say vote, but aligns with conservative values doesn't mean that they don't have the potential to be considering veganism.
If you want to put
it might be. Well, here's a for instance. Someone has a gradual shift. They start living vegan.
Yeah, but potential.
And then they identify as conservative.
I agree with you.
Years go past, and then eventually shift to progressive system. And at what point are they allowed to identify as vegan?
Jeremy, if you want to use the word potential, if you want to insert that word in, that changes things. That's kind of their pre-vegan position. Well, yeah. I mean, everyone's got the potential to become vegan, presumably. I mean, you could say at a stretch, Donald Trump has the potential to become vegan. Now, whether that's likely, given his personality and possibly mental state, according to some experts on that, and
the Trump stakes business.
Yeah, given all that, you'd think it's kind of unlikely. But the point is, we do adhere to the idea that we would like the idea to have a vegan world. We'd actually like that, and more than that, we actually usually say we think it's possible. That would then mean that eventually everyone would align with vegan values. It's not that vegan values would become all values. That can't be how it works. Otherwise, you'd have meat eaters being vegans.
And that's not what I'm proposing here. I'm proposing that outside of the veganuary situation, someone commits to living vegan, they oppose animal use, but they have these other values, as we all do. Let's face it. When we all start living vegan, we have a whole load of values that we pull along with us.
Commit to being plant-based. That makes more sense, doesn't it?
Well, then we're conflating diet with animal use.
Because
I'm not sure. Sorry, go ahead.
Because veganuary is more than just diet.
I was framing it as outside of the scope of veganuary, specifically when someone opposes all animal use. They're committing to living vegan, opposing all animal use, so outside of veganuary, which I agree has a dietary focus. Well, why can't they start living vegan? Like, at what point are they allowed to identify as vegan? That's what I think is the issue with this. Like, let people, I think.
I mean, I think it's an interesting one, because we do have a lot of vegans in that situation where the whole of veganism is vegan for the animals, right? And not all human issues are a separate matter. They argue that. Okay, so we already have a lot of vegans and people who are identify as vegan, identified by others in the vegan movement as vegan. So we've got a lot of that already. So that's where education within a social movement becomes important, because we have to be reflexive and within a social movement, because that's where I said there is shifts in a social movement, but I think it's going too far, and that's why I would argue against it within a social movement, when people try to reduce the scope of veganism and make the focus the scope, as AV have done, for example, right? They're trying to make veganism just about the other animals only, which is not the original values of the vegan social movement.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I was just going to say, we've been going for about 90 minutes. I've been trying to gesture at a common ground. I'm not sure if we're going to get there today. What I propose we do is we put up a second poll. Yeah, I'm trying to respond to that. Yeah. So, okay, maybe we each try to sum up what we think has come from this discussion, and then we'll let people vote, and then maybe go to a few comments. And
very little.
So we do try to avoid messy debates when we can. I don't know. Maybe messy's good if it gets us all thinking more. But what I take away from this discussion is, I mean, we know each other's positions quite well. I don't know if your understanding my position has shifted during this discussion or not, but we align a lot on the values thing. I just think when we make sweeping statements that include entire groups, not necessarily the oppressive subsection of those groups, I don't see how that makes sense. You talk about shifts within the movement. Well, they're never going to be in the movement if we tell them they can't be in the movement. So my position is that it's less likely, and that we need to talk about some of these values, but to suggest it's not possible under the conservative umbrella, that's where I would challenge the efficacy of it. But if you'd like to a few closing remarks, and then I'll pop up the other poll.
Okay, I want to address somebody's asked us if we're both intersectionals, I think, or intersectionalists, I think. Now, the answer to that is the vegan movement is intersectional. It's pro-intersectional. It was started. I
wouldn't identify as an intersectional. I'd push back on that, though.
No, I mean, this term has become so toxic that the best thing to do is move away from it. But if you're thinking about this idea from David Nybert, that oppression and liberation are entangled ideas, then this is what the vegan movement was founded on. The idea that oppressions were entangled. And Donald Watson said that. He even said that we won't, which, funny enough, somebody pointed out that goes against what Tom Regan said. Tom Regan at one point talked about taking one brick out of the wall of oppression at a time, whereas Watson said that we need to dismantle everything at once. And he said we can't do it unless we take it all down at once. And veganism would be central to that. That's what Watson said. So the vegan movement started out and remains, in my view, a pro-intersectional position, except I don't like the word intersectional, pro-intersectional anymore, because it's become such a messy, toxic thing. Because, I mean, it's now being used as an insult. You're intersectional. I mean, how can
if we can time out? This is a completely different topic.
No, I just
different topic.
I wanted to answer that question.
I think the quick thing I would say around that, the critique is usually on the application rather than the idea itself. I think most people agree with the ideas, and I want to invite us to question how we think those ideas should be read. But that's a separate point. I think back to the can conservatives be vegan. My suggestion is that maybe they're less likely to be, but I don't think telling them they can't be vegan is I'm not sure what the efficacy of it. Maybe you could go from there from a closing remarks perspective.
Okay,
and then we'll do comments. If there is comments you want to address, let's go there. But I'm trying to get it as unmessy as possible.
You're opposed to the idea that if someone presents themselves with conservative values and arguments and positions, that we can't or we shouldn't say you cannot be vegan, or your values don't align with veganism. Something's got to shift. You're saying that we can't do that. Is that right?
Well, I think we're making a pretty general statement that would have a lot of nuances to it. I think within an animal context or human context or any of it, if there's values we don't agree with, absolutely have those discussions. That's why we're animal advocates.
Oh yeah, but
of course I'm not saying don't challenge values.
I mean, we talked about gatekeeping, and you've talked about you're putting up a block and all that kind of stuff, and you're telling people that. I mean, it's not as though we can stop people coming into the movement.
We try though when we say they can't be vegan.
That's a position, and so we're saying if you present with those values, they don't correspond with vegan values. And so, but in some senses, what's going on there, which is an interesting thing for me, is what Steve Best was doing. I mean, Steve Best has got a kind of like reputation as being the militant and everything. But I think what he was getting at in that little section from the Luxembourg talk is because he said, I don't care how you vote, but we are a left-leaning movement. We're a left-wing movement. Our values are left-wing. And I think that's like an invitation to people to say, how do your values align with vegan values? And that is for people to, that is a kind of position that people have got to kind of resolve within themselves.
Isn't that entirely different than saying they can't be vegan?
Well, it's saying that, but in a different way. I mean, like,
maybe it's a question of framing.
You're just using the language of the thing. It's like meat is murder. I mean, like, it's almost like a slogan. Can conservatives be vegan? Well, no, if they remain adherents of conservative values which are oppressive. No, they can't. You then move to, well, maybe there are some conservative values which are not oppressive. Well, okay, we need to see them, I guess.
Well, I know, as you said, we're moving towards closing statements. Just another thing's come up that I think is worth talking about. Let's talk about subsidies. Let's talk about trying to get something voted on to reverse subsidies and maybe even shift them to plant subsidies versus subsidies supporting animal use. I mean, do you think it could be a good thing having conservative vegans, I'll put it in quotes, that might actually vote for that versus relying on these other parties. I mean, isn't that a huge thing about politics? I mean, they have a majority here. We have no chance of getting that stuff through unless we're able to at least talk across the aisle, right?
Well, it's not. You don't have to have conservative values to lobby the conservative government, especially on things like subsidies, because the environmental crisis is going to make it the case where eventually it's going to be in everybody's interest to switch to subsidies. Just a question of how much of a crisis will we have by then, really. But there's no reason why the vegan movement can't start making inroads into advocating for subsidy change. But that is just, as it were, transmitted out to everybody. I mean, you're saying, well, okay, the Conservatives are in power in Britain at the moment, and so would it not be better for Conservatives to transmit that message? I think that's what you're saying. Well, that's where it becomes a bit more difficult, perhaps. But there's no reason why vegans can't transmit that message to Conservatives, is there?
Surely them doing it themselves from within, represented by the conservative vegan group. I mean, we're saying the same thing, aren't we? We're not. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not saying the only people that can lobby them have to be outside. I mean, why can't they lobby from within? I appreciate that. Talk about the definition of lobbying. I'm using loosely here, but could it be a positive having these individuals who might be more likely to vote for vegan issues?
Okay, so what are you saying now, that we need to dilute vegan values in order to get Conservatives identifying as vegans in the Conservative system in order for them to better lobby the Conservative government than an outsider? But that would mean corrupting vegan values in order to do that. It's like a strategy.
I'm not suggesting diluting the values. I want to make that very clear. My position is that we shouldn't shut people out of the conversation before they have the opportunity to look at those values. And that's where I think the framing of the debate, can conservatives be vegan, is shutting people out of the discussion.
No, the thing is, though, Jeremy, your entire position seems to be based on the articulation of vegan values is shutting people out of veganism. Well, if that is true, then so be it. We've got to articulate vegan values, especially if we want to ripen people up to them.
I agree with that, but that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. What about the center conservative values? I think we both agreed that there is the potential, correct me if I'm wrong, for centrist conservatives to not have these oppressive views and actually be open to veganism. And maybe in a few years they shift across the line and then they identify as something else. Well, I don't.
I mean, you've used the phrase a few times, but you haven't given me any. I mean, like, what do these people stand for? Are there such people? I think you're probably suggesting that there's going to be a big chunk of the Conservative Party who are like that. Is that your position?
Well, I think when people talk about the deeply oppressive views, I don't know. I would like to think that that's a smaller chunk. I'd like to think that, but hey, I mean, probably need some polling for that. But okay, so I'm not sure if either of us is going to move anymore on this point. Maybe we can poll the audience. I think that might give us a useful data point. So hopefully this conversation, I don't know if we've come any closer to this, because I think theoretically, practically, I think there are some nuances to this, which I'm not sure if we've done a good job articulating those today or not.
Well, I think nuances imply complexity. This is a very complex issue. If you're talking about building a functioning social movement within a culture, and the culture is deeply speciesist, we do have a major job. And of course, it is true that everybody in this chat, we all want the vegan movement to be as big as possible. But we still have to have some gatekeeping. And I've already said that the word gatekeeping sounds so negative, but it is true that it's essential. And so, but you can see, I mean, I get the impression that you can say, well, okay, these people can be in the movement, but then it's kind of into movement politics then. which you can call kind of like collective reflectivity. That I agree with, because you're going to get people in the movement that don't have the same values as you. It's just that there's got to be some line drawing at some point. There's always a thing where you can kind of tolerate this, and there's compromise. We do that all the time in a social movement. You no doubt tolerate some of the things that I say, and I no doubt tolerate some of the things you say. That is just the ebb and flow within a social movement. But there are some things that are just so unfitting with our values that you've then got to go. You've got to put the kind of a flag in the sand eventually and go, this is veganism. You shall not pass the Gandalf thing. Because veganism has got to mean something.
Well, and we didn't. I meant to do it from the beginning. We didn't get to it. But my thought was to frame the whole thing around the definition of veganism, because when we start talking about the values of veganism, I think there's a heck of a lot more in it than just that one paragraph definition.
Yeah, but we've already talked about the definition is, almost the definition as we know it is no good for this conversation. It doesn't really.
So how do people know the values of the movement? So they're I'm just trying. I always try to put myself in the perspective of the other, and I just see if someone's saying they can't be something and they don't understand what the values are.
Well, I think
all of a sudden
to quote Tom Regan, I think that's a very difficult question, and the reason, I see Tim Barford's in the chat, and I wrote a series for VegFest UK about the values and position of the vegan social movement pioneers. And their values are not really reflected by what's come to be known as the definition of veganism. But we do know that there are certain kind of politics to why that definition, or at least situations which created that particular definition. Okay, so we do know that, but we also know, I think, but if you look at what the founders of the movement said, that the vegan definition that we use is pretty wishy-washy compared with that. I think a lot of people would agree with that statement. I don't know whether you would, but I would argue that the values of the people who started the movement are more radical than the definition from 1979 through to 88. In the same way as, a lot of things are kind of moderated in this. Like, you could be an extremist now by holding a laptop in the street. Suddenly, you're a radical.
Well, yeah.
So things do shift. It's just that I'm in danger here of being kind of look as though I'm some kind of stuck in the mud type of, oh, well, that's what they said at the beginning, and that's what we should adhere to. That's not what I mean. I know it's sounding a bit like that, and I apologize for that. It's not really what I mean. I'm just saying that vegan values, the radical vegan values of the pioneers, have got a lot about them which are of value, and I think they articulated the core of what veganism is, not what it's become.
Just so we don't go too. I appreciate the values are a big part of this, but just so we don't go too far from trying to draw this, put a bit of a bow on this, I do think we should have a vote. I've seen that come up in the comments. So hopefully, I don't know whether you've been with us for a short time or a long time. Thank you. I'm going to put up a link, and let us know what you think. Oh, there's a lot of undecided. Let us know what you think.
Well, don't forget though.
Can conservatives be vegan?
Yeah,
you already made your points.
But don't forget.
you're trying to sway the votes at the last minute.
It's a very crude question. Let's not.
You haven't seen the results yet. You may have won. So the results are coming in. We'll give it 30 seconds or so, and then I'll pop them up on the screen for everyone.
We should have yes and no as an option, because that's the answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a great discussion. I think this is a great forum, and we've got a whole list of discussions we can cover. So I mean, we haven't spent as much time with the comments today as I normally would like to do. I think some of these these topics, especially when we're trading ideas more so than moving through the comments. That's going to happen inevitably. If there's any questions, maybe in the comments, if you could just put a Q before a comment, and maybe, what do you think, 10 minutes or so for questions? And I know you want to wrap up and feed Rouge and the rest of it. What do you feel? What are you feeling?
I think Rouge is.
Or do you want to do you want to do another 7-hour live stream? A few more hours, be at the halfway mark.
I think Rouge gave up. Apparently, I'm in damage control now.
So we are at 28 of the 50 people here. So I think I'll go ahead and put them up, unless... Feel free to keep voting. Here we have it. So 52% still say no. Cannot be vegan. To 33% yes. So I think if we were to compare the two, a lot of the undecideds, it looks like, have swayed to your court.
Good. What am I supposed to say to that? You know, victory. I mean, what are you going to do? Give me a cup or something? Wait a minute.
Well, and it looks like a few went to...
I won!
Did you have that ready to go?
No. It's on my shelf, honestly. I got.
See, I think
from my football friends for my 60th birthday.
To be fair, the number who said yes also increased. You know, maybe this is a product of these discussions, because at least a lot of people that started with "I'm not sure" now have an opinion. I mean, the "I'm not sure" went down to about a third of what it was. So I think to me that's a sign of a good discussion, because, you know, we've gotten people to move from the "I'm not sure" to a bit more of a decision. Let's see if I can get these side by side.
It's a very tricky issue, because it's divisive. But the point is, there are just some values that don't align with vegan values, and it's as simple as that. What you do about that, if you like, fact, can be a, you know, we can argue about that. You know, do you bring them in to educate them? Do you state them as keep them as outsiders and say these are our values and that's it? You know, I mean, these are, I mean, political parties have the same problem. All social movements have the same problem. Who's in, who's out, and why?
Yeah. Well, and to me, I think we'd agree that it comes down to the framing, and that's really what I've been pushing throughout, is just the way we say these things is perhaps more important than because I think fundamentally we agree on a lot of this. But just looking at it, I think actually I might have to have a legal challenge to the vote. Challenge a recount, because it looks like, actually, I mean, just looking nominally, we've got a change from 22 to 36% versus 39 to 50%. So you've gone up 11%, and I've gone up 14%. So we might have to look at the numbers here, but I might have had a slightly bigger increase. So I don't know. We might have to, after the fact, look at this. But yeah.
I'll tell you what, Jeremy. If Jon Snow ever retires, I think you'll probably be hired by the BBC to do all the thing on election night. You know.
Yeah, we could keep it going. All right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a good discussion. I think, hopefully, I'd just like to see us align more on these things. And I appreciate there's always going to be disagreement, and disagreement can be a good thing. But yeah, I just think that the more we can align as a movement, because it's very difficult to send a clear message, and this is what the Animal Rights Show is all about. It's very difficult to send a clear message if we fundamentally disagree. I think someone might be cheeky. Either we're getting more voters, or someone's being cheeky and figured out that you can vote multiple times. So.
Oh, you can? No, I didn't know that. I wish I'd have known that.
You'd be voting in the background.
So Race Lever says Roger lost this one, but the figures don't seem to support that.
Well, we could look at the numbers, because to me, it's more about shift versus the net effects, because I think the dominant view is in your favor from the start. It's more how many changed throughout the discussion.
Oh, well, that's convenient for you to think that
Well,
criteria.
did we not agree on that? I'm sure we agreed on that in advance. So, and I appreciate a lot of people missed the starting poll as well. So it's not an overly clear one. So I did say to put cues in. So I don't want to miss anything here because I know when I'm watching live streams and it doesn't come up, it can be frustrating. So anyone that wants us to address a specific point, put up a cue. Chris has just said, it seems like everyone is generally against oppression no matter who they are. So doesn't this argument mainly come down to what people class as oppressive, not just that they are in favor of it? I want to make sure I understand that. But I mean, I think hopefully we generally agree what oppressive is. That'd be my first read on that. Welcome, by the way, Chris. I don't think we've welcomed you from the beginning. I know we've had a lot of flux. Do you have anything on that one?
Well, I mean, like it's interesting, that one. But I mean, I think, is building walls and having strong anti-immigration policies is interfering with the free movement of people around the world. Is that oppression or is that something else? I mean, like maybe we can get hooked up on the word oppression there. So yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a little bit like that thing about asking people if they are against animal cruelty. Everybody's going to say, yeah, they are. But I mean, ask everybody, are you against oppression? They're going to say yes. And then, yeah, like Chris is saying, maybe then that's a question of, well, then you've got to start working out what is oppression.
I agree. I think that's an important part of the discussion because I'm all about, as you know, about objective language, and I do think oppression can be a bit subjective in some instances. I think, to me, first of all, as a movement, we have to decide internally what it is, and I think we've got some ground to cover there. Going to Ronnie, there are members of conservative vegans who are pro the badger call, pro shooting, pro HS2, etc. Should we not be urging them to become truly vegan and change their views on these things? So the question I would have back to that is, does truly vegan require them to stop identifying as a conservative? Because that's really, to me, what this discussion's been about. Or can they actually find those values, identify with those values, and change the way they vote on these issues within the conservative umbrella? And I don't necessarily, I mean, my knowledge of UK politics is not probably prepared to have a robust answer on that.
Well, I wonder if there's an article anywhere that says conservative values and vegan values not are the same, but can align. I mean, I suppose we are into kind of alliance politics kind of area. Chris Hines says, in organized debates, it's normally down to shift, which means that you won, Jeremy. But I would just say this is anything but an organized debate.
So you're debating with the outcome of the debate. Part 2 of the debate, we'll be arguing about the outcome.
No, I just said by that you won.
Here, pass the trophy over to me. I should have a trophy ready to go so we could pass it across the screen. Come on.
Yeah, we could do that. I always got the wrong way, don't I?
I'm not seeing any other cues come up in the chat. I think we had a good discussion, hopefully between us and as well as the chat itself. We're at 2 hours. What do you say we wind this thing down?
Yeah, well, it's getting up to the hour, so we ought to shut it off there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you everyone for joining us. I know I've enjoyed this and definitely want to watch it again myself and reflect on it more, which I think as a movement, hopefully all of us as individuals are continuing to do, because as long as we're willing to be open to these topics, we're going to be able to find better answers for them. So hopefully everybody's having a good weekend. And we'll see you next time. Monday, tomorrow, we have a 6 o'clock show. The title, I believe, is Vivisection and Veganism. I'll be bowing out of that one. We're dividing and conquering, but the rest of the team will be tackling that one. So be sure to join us there on Roger's channel. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
See you next time.